We as the British public, we like an underdog.
The Chinese manufacturers that are coming in, they're answering all those wants and requirements.
A lot of the brands still have work to do when it comes to things like their website and their e-commerce journeys.
What is the long-term strategy?
Hello and welcome to the Talk Auto podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Holly, and every month we get industry experts on to talk all things automotive. And this month we have yet another very prevalent topic, don't we?
We certainly do. Yeah, this month we're going to be discussing brand consideration and how that's evolving across the industry, specifically linked to new market entrants.
And we're joined by two fantastic guests, so thank you very much both for joining. Delighted to introduce Philip Nothard, who is returning to the podcast. He was on our very first episode, so it's lovely to have you back, Insights Director at Cox Automotive Europe. And also welcome to Paul Hilton, who is Head of Retail at JATO Dynamics. So how are you both? Thank you for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah. Yeah, we're glad you came back, Phil. We're glad you came back. So just to kind of, before we dive into the podcast, can we just have a really quick overview of your guys' journey in automotive and why you're here today talking about new entrant OEMs and kind of the changing landscape in automotive? Paul, should we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been with JATO now for 3.5 years. I look after our retail vertical, so that covers kind of everything from portals, marketplaces, search engines, dealer management systems, and everything kind of right down to that kind of retail solutions. I've been in the industry coming on 20 years now, actually, which I know sounds surprising, but I started my journey with actually a division of Auto Trader at the time called Trader Data Systems. You might remember they were taking on Experian and HPI from a credit check perspective. I was then with Mannheim, actually, with what was Portfolio Europe for a little while, out of the what was the Newton Willows office up there. Mm-hmm. And then I spent a big chunk of my career with a company called G-Forces, which became ATG and is now part of Keyloop, delivering sort of e-commerce solutions to the auto industry. But yeah, very much focused at JATO on our kind of global retail business. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
No problem. And Phil, just a quick recap for us. Our listeners are familiar with you, but for those who perhaps have not listened to our first episode.
So Philip Nothard, Insight Director for Cox Automotive Europe. 35 plus years in the industry. But yeah, I think I do feel it and look it, to be fair.
No, I never said that.
I think 8 years now with Cox Automotive and various roles previously to that with different organisations, but very much ingrained in what's happening in our automotive sector at the minute.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you on, and that's a wealth of experience as well. What's that? Over 50 years.
More wealth than me.
We're definitely going to be pulling on a lot of that today.
Yeah. Well, we're super excited to have you on, and definitely, Paul, we've got some very exciting kind of insights to discuss from a JATO perspective as well. But yeah, so we'll be kind of diving into the new entrant OEMs kind of disturbing the market. Now, just to kind of set the scene, these new entrant OEMs have kind of really made a kind of wave in the market. They're sitting at around 10% market share at the moment, maybe a little bit more now actually, and kind of are looking to keep building on that. We'll kind of be exploring how loyal consumers are to their current brands. So those are those kind of established brands, and also how retailers are going to be kind of navigating the new partnerships with these new entrant OEMs as well. And we're going to be basing it in a lot of the research that Cox Automotive has done for Car Dealer Live, which obviously, Phil, you'll be there presenting. Cool. So yeah, it's a great topic of conversation.
Definitely is. We just want to pull on the report that you guys at JATO did sort of last year, and really talk around sort of the way that these brands have evolved and how they're coming into the market in such force and at pace. So we're now in a place within the UK where there's about 75 brands, although we were speaking just before we recorded, maybe we need to talk about how we actually define what a brand is and the how you get to be that established in the marketplace. What are the main factors, do you think, that have influenced the brand mix that we're seeing in the UK today?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors, but I think we could broadly characterize it into kind of 4 buckets. If we look at consumer appetite, first and foremost, so we as the British public, we like an underdog, we like a challenger brand, and we've seen that in supermarkets way back when. You look at the success of Aldi and Lidl, for example, in those kind of, disrupting that big 4 sort of supermarket chain. So that's been a big factor. You've then got the market conditions, which we really should probably spend a bit of time talking around. We are in a cost of living crisis. There is an affordability issue there. You've then got the product themselves, so the entrants and their product offering. And then lastly, the distribution network. You can't launch a brand without having routes to market and distribution. And the UK has a very, very well established and very well respected dealer network. And it's clear some of these new entrants have taken the correct strategy, in my opinion, which is partnering with these big dealer groups that have got that brand reputation, and that gives them assimilation of that brand through networks like the likes of Arnold Clark and big brands that themselves have taken on 8 or 9 different new entrants over the last couple of years. So I think the success is largely down to those 4 factors.
Yeah.
And I think, just if you think about the sort of the more global picture, you've got 2025 global production is going to be circa 95 million by the time the final figures come out. China, which is obviously where a lot of the new entrants are coming from, they're 34 million production in that 2025 figure. So, a third of global vehicle production is out of China. So those vehicles have got to go somewhere, and that production is increasing. The domestic market is declining in China and has been done for some time. So production is going out, and that goes into Europe, UK, South America, primarily UK and Europe, and then moving into sort of South America there, whilst to keep North America and US kind of in the back burner for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point around the US. I mean, it's effectively cut off right now, right? The UK has very, very low cost of entry for those new entrants. The cost of a Chinese OEM moving into the US is effectively there is no point in them being able to make a success there. And the established brands there are very, very well established. But the challenges over there are actually now the challenges that were here. You look at Hyundai, for example, they've experienced a bit of a market dip here in the UK, maybe I think about 7% year-on-year decline in registrations, but they've achieved the same level of growth in the US. Now, California has 1.8 million car registrations a year. The UK has about 2 million. So if they can grow in a market the size of the US by 7 or 8%, it might be at the sacrifice of some growth here in the UK or in Europe, but those global sort of battle lines for entrants are really starting to take shape. And you can see that in South America. We're seeing that. India, now into Australia and APAC, there's a growth of Chinese OEMs. So I think those kind of global battle lines for those kind of OEMs and those challenger brands is really starting to take shape. But like I said earlier, we embrace challenges in this country as a brand, and I think we've created an environment not just in automotive. You look at it in fashion. We were just talking about the growth of Shein or Temu and those other kind of retail brands.
Not just in automotive, is it?
No, exactly. And we've embraced those, and we buy through those channels. So I think there is a growing confidence for Chinese. There's still challenges, and I think we should get on to some of those kind of obstacles that some of those challenger brands will face. But you made the point, Ben. It can take years, even decades, to build a brand. So I think you can have new entrants, and that's fine. But some will go. Some won't last the pace, and that's going to create an interesting dynamic over the next few years.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think what we're also seeing as well is that a lot of these Chinese new entrants are really coming in strong with regards to the technology that they're bringing into these vehicles. And actually, it's not maybe a £2,000 option for auto steer or autopilot, cruise control, that sort of stuff. Not only is that coming in standard, you're also getting that at the cheaper entry point as well.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you guys can speak a little bit about sort of, how important are the specification levels and the technology that we're seeing come through?
Extremely important. I mean, if you look at the recent study that we've done at Cox Automotive, that sub 34-year-old age bracket that are really into technology, innovation, simplicity, connectivity. The Chinese manufacturers that are coming in, they're answering all those wants and requirements from that age profile, that demographic of the sector. So, and this quick as well, in terms of that, as you say there, they want that connectivity. They want to jump in the car immediately, whether it's Android or whether it's CarPlay, it's connected, everything works. They're not paying additional money for a heated steering wheel and heated seats. Everything's standard on the vehicles. And that's kind of what the new manufacturers are responding to very, very quickly. So it's crucial.
They are, and I mean, you look at those products, and there are very little options to configure. They come fully spec'd. You pick a colour. You might have an option to pick upgraded wheels, but that's it. Once you pick the powertrain, whether you want hybrid, petrol, or fully electric, you pick a colour, and some might be standard, a couple might be premium colours, and then that's it. And everything else comes as standard. I mean, you're getting £32,000 new cars with, super fast wireless charging pads, front and rear. Like, those things would have cost a couple of £1,000 options on vehicles. Even Apple CarPlay was considered an option on vehicles a few years ago. The bar gets raised massively because these entrants come in with a kind of, it's not a basic solution, but it's a fully stacked vehicle for £32,000. And the price point is just sweet because the market conditions are right. We have an affordability crisis. We have, we have a PCP product, which is a massive driver to that. We have the company car and benefit in kind schemes and salary sacrifice schemes that create a really, really great environment for you to go and use a portion of your salary to go and buy a new vehicle. If that vehicle is only £300-400 a month in salary sacrifice, you're only losing £150 a month, and you're in a brand new vehicle. And that's that is what these challenger brands are bringing to the market.
And I think and just to add to Paul's point there, that you look at the new entrants, and probably discussed it previously, where the time to market, the renewal cycle of new products coming into the sector. It's 18 months on average with the Chinese manufacturers, whereas, historically it's been 7 years with let's call them traditional OEMs. That means they can be right up to the latest technology. They're very responsive to the local requirements, demands. Some of these new entrants, when they came in, and you interviewed Nick Thomas from Shanghai. They will change the specification to the local market. They understand that there are requirements, various, whether that's in Europe, South America, or to the UK. They will change the vehicle to be responsive. They are that quick, and if they do come into the market and there is something that the pushback from either the fleet operators or the consumers, they're willing to just change it, and they'll change it quickly.
Yeah, almost overnight.
There's no delay.
It's
It's decisions in weeks.
They're so agile.
Days.
And they've got the economies of
Huge.
scale over there as well, right?
Yeah, and they are so agile. They will have a different product that suits the Spanish market, to the German market, to the French market, to the UK market, and then internationally. And they need to be, because when you're a challenger, what is your point of differential? You can't just be cheaper. That isn't enough now. So they are improving that product, but it is raising the bar for the established brands. And I know we kind of use that term established, or those legacy brands, but they have built a legacy over many, many decades, and they are making big challenges. I mean, you've seen Stellantis has written off a huge portion of its EV costs recently. VW just announced last week, increased job cuts in Germany. We're talking 50,000 employees in Germany under Volkswagen, because their margins are being challenged. They're not making as much profit on their vehicles. The margins are under stress because they're having to build different powertrains, different options, build things in a standard that they would have once charged an option for. So that's creating, a position now where those established brands are going to fight back. And that's where I said earlier, we'll see those kind of battle lines being drawn globally where those brands want to really, really dominate. VW said just last week they want to focus on US growth. They see the opportunity there, and they know that they're not going to get challenged by the likes of JQ, Modo, BYD in that US market, and they want to be more aggressive in growing in that market.
Yeah, there's definitely pressure on those established OEMs that, these new entrants. And we actually were having a conversation with the team before, and one of them mentioned a conversation that they were having, and it said, the spec of these mostly Chinese entrant OEMs is either good or it's fantastic, it's outstanding. It's never basic. It's never okay. Like it's the bar has been raised to such a point where actually the specs are just so much more advanced than what we would potentially expect from some of these established OEMs. So it's just a huge difference. Now, as part of that Cox Automotive consumer study, we found that I think it was 35% of respondents would be confident in buying a vehicle from a new brand, 30% definitely a little bit more hesitant or a flat no. Where we see these new market entrants, where have they made the most gains, and where are we seeing them struggle to break through?
I think the study shows that 1 in 3 have considered a shift to an alternative new brand in the last 6 months. So clearly now we've got 75 brands represented, and that's changing fairly regularly now just in the UK and before you even move into Europe. I think that clearly there are shifts. That sub 34-year-old is very strong that are considering the new brands. They're less brand loyal. You get into the close to my age profile now in that 55 above and definitely 64 and above. Very resistant to change. They want that brand loyalty. They understand the network, the infrastructure. They've had that brand for decades. So there is shifts there. And even the study does show, even geographically, there are different variances. You go into sort of London and the south, quite strong. As you get further up north, that strength reduces, as you start to head up north. Now, some of that might be due to infrastructure, it might be charging infrastructure, it might be due to, the kind of driving that they do as you get up. There's various with this, and, we mustn't, we talk a lot about EVs and the Chinese manufacturers, but it's not just EVs. They have very high presence of sort of plug-in hybrids and hybrid products.
But this is, I think, where we go back to that point of the dealer networks, because those big dealer groups or those established dealer groups are brands themselves, right? Yeah. So these consumers that were maybe a little bit unsure, knowing that it's being backed and supported by a brand in the dealer group that they've trusted for many, many years, is going to be very important. So I think some of those brands that played with different agency models and direct to consumer models over the last few years have kind of partly responsible for creating this environment and this opportunity where the Chinese OEMs have come in. We all know, and you've spoken to them as well as I do. You've had very, very well established, generational dealer groups that's OEM partner has decided to change the relationship with them. They either don't want them to be an OEM partner because they want to consolidate the number of brands, and these dealers are left with physical stores that are perfectly capable of housing a car dealer group, a car dealership, and in comes an OEM that puts an offer on the table, and they're ripe for it, and that situation is being created. It's that perfect storm we were talking about earlier of those kind of things coming together, and that distribution network has been opened by some of those established brands that pivoted their business models and went to an alternative retailing strategy, have created that physical footprint that other brands have stepped into. And you see BYD with 100 plus locations, JQ and Moda with 100 plus locations, and look where those two brands are on the leaderboards at the moment in terms of model and sale performance. It's not a surprise. The product is great, but they've got the distribution network and the price points to be successful.
Yeah, they often say the UK is almost like a test bed for a lot of these new brands. And one of the reasons that might be is because the largeness of the dealer network or the potential of that coverage is huge. Yeah. Now, to your point there, Paul, kind of with the consumer awareness of these brands through greater dealership kind of penetration, has also come better access to information, better awareness of the brands itself. Do you think that greater transparency and access to information has kind of changed how consumers perceive these brands and perceive the risk of adopting these brands?
Well, no, I think it does. But if we look actually, like if you take BYD, they sponsored the Euro 2024 tournament, right? They're also now the main sponsor, one of the main sponsors for Manchester City Football Club. MG, I know we talked about kind of where the volume sits in terms of new entrants, and I know MG is a very well-established British brand, but they are Chinese owned and they are relatively new as an entrant. So I would put them in that pot. They've got a major sponsorship deal now with Arsenal. So building a brand is more than just a distribution network. It's more than just some TV adverts, but it is growing. I mean, I looked at the CarWow video views, for example, for new Chinese entrants. They're over 1 million views in a couple of months. Like that is huge volume of views on that content. They're running lots of advertising. The dealers are running lots of advertising to promote these brands. And you see them, they're on the road. I know my neighbour owns a JATO over the road. You talk to them, you see them, they're around where you live, and people start to build that confidence that then, not just the younger drivers that are probably more likely to take that risk, but that older generation becomes more comfortable in time, right?
Yeah, and generations will shift. I mean, let's not, those sub 34-year-olds will become the next generation above that. So, time changes. I think the big question right at the start around those 75 brands in what is generally a 2.1 new car market here in the UK, that who will survive? Will they all survive? And this is the study, one of the reasons behind the study is trying to understand for the dealer network, pulling out some of these geographic and demographic variances of adoption towards these new brands, rather than just, I want some of the new product that's in the marketplace from a dealer perspective. Because, the new entrants want brand awareness, they want coverage, they want open points, they want partners. That will change in time. Yeah. That's the thing. At the minute, they're building a brand, and to do that, they want retailers, they want partners to build that brand. And to Paul's point, there is a lot of shift in the traditional brands around that geographic coverage, the number of partners that they've got, etc. So there are a lot of dealers that are moving to the new brands because they're offering, the financial backup, they're offering the marketing, they're offering improved margins. The question will be is in time, what does that start to look like when they've built a brand, and whether they exist and can exist in the UK as part of one of 75 to 80 brands is going to be a question.
Yeah, and I mean, I think an interesting point to look at with that is you look at the incentives being offered by some of the new brands at the moment. I mean, 0% finance when our base rates are where they are doesn't normally happen very often, right? And you've not just got 0% finance deals, you've got exceptional values on lease rates on those vehicles. We've got even Polestar running 0% at the moment. Volvo's running 0%. It's challenging those other brands to put in different incentives to try and drive that. But we did a bit of work looking at the comparable spec of like the BYD Seal, and you compare it to its similar vehicles, and I won't kind of name those particular models, but we're talking £9,000 to £14,000 cheaper for a comparable level of spec on that same vehicle. Then when you overlay a 0% or a 1.9% interest rate, it is very, very attractive. And where people are shopping with their wallets, that is going to make a big difference. But the brands will respond. They will come back with different competitive offerings themselves. The challenge they've had is I think they've been building out this EV structure that has been demanded of them by the governments here and across Europe. And you can see now with what Stellantis have done recently and what VW have done, they've pivoted their strategy. Like Leap Motor is one of the biggest Chinese brands having success in Europe, backed by Stellantis. So Stellantis are maybe not putting as much focus on its EV product development, or maybe not saying they're not putting focus on it, but they're rethinking their EV strategy. But instead, they're partnering with some of these challenger brands who can bring a different product for ultra urban areas like the Italian and Spanish cities where people only want small vehicles. We have a high SUV uptake of Chinese and emerging brands here. Leapmotor is a completely different proposition, and those other brands will start to bring different products that suit those European markets. But yeah, I think going back to the question, the market conditions are right for those brands to be successful, and with the dealer network and with branding and with sponsorship and with video views and with attractive offers, they can improve, but they're not perfect yet still.
No.
I think a lot of the brands still have work to do when it comes to things like their website and their e-commerce journeys. Some of them are still quite basic, and you can't go on the site and compare the powertrains and the options even within that one brand and see all of the spec and equipment. And sometimes it's not just enough to have a contact form and an offer.
No, and I think that was highlighted in the study. I mean, if you look at the detail in the study that we've done, cost of entry, technology, innovation, cost of ownership is all what's attracting customers to these new brands that are coming to the UK. Contrary to that, is there still a residual value to be determined? How strong they'll see as they sort of move through time. We start to see these vehicles come back into the used car market. Infrastructure, after sales, part supply, all of this is yet to be proven by a lot of the later new entrants. Yeah, we've seen BYD, fast growth initially, JATO and Moda, faster growth in a short period of time. Following that, we've got more coming. But there is a lot to prove, and I think that might play out in some of the demographic responses to the survey, that maybe the, let's say, older generation are a little bit more thinking about what's the infrastructure look like, what's my service backup look like, what's my aftermarket look like, will I be able to get the parts if something does go wrong on my car? Is it going to hold its value when it enters the used car market? These are all questions that have yet to be proven, and that's not just in the consumer space. That goes into the fleet sector. That downtime when you're in the fleet space is costly. It's all about utilisation. It's got to get, if that car's off the road for any amount of time, it starts costing. So that plays a big part into the decisions, specifically in the fleet and the rental market, whether they enter into some of these new brands. Now, over time, you'll start to see as the BYDs, the JATO Modas, the Cherries come along, the Geelys come along, and others, they start to establish that network. And, again, going back to the earlier Talk Auto with Nick Thomas from Shanghai, they spent a lot of time in making sure that they had the after-sales partner, they had the road assist, they had everything set up, they had the body repair centres already in place before they came to market, because they knew how important that sector was to ensure that they will get adopted. It's not just a case of new shiny showroom, some new names above the door, there's some vehicles and get going. It's everything that comes with that is important to the consumers.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of that, not only for the consumers to making sure that they can service the cars, but I guess a lot of that ties into whether the retail brands are actually going to adopt some of these new entrants as well. We've touched quite a lot on cost of entry and making sure that they've got the network of parts and after sales services. Is there anything else there that you think the retailers are looking at when they're considering these new entrants, and maybe who to choose to fill those vacant?
Our conversations with the dealers, and it's probably the same with Paul from JATO, is that thinking about that backup, that financial backup from the new entrants. What is their strategy? What's their plan? What's their used car strategy? What's their used approved scheme look like as a manufacturer? The whole backup, and you speak to some of the CEOs of the large dealer groups. These are questions that because they'll be approached. Every new entrant that comes into the UK or Europe or South America, you go straight for the dealer groups, and it's overcoming. But they've got to sort of say, who do I choose? Who do I replace to put these new manufacturers in with? Yes, today it might look attractive, new brand, but have they got the financial backing? Have they got the longevity? Do they want to be a partner of mine long term? And Michael Dunn from Dunn Insights, one of his quotes is, you might be in the same bed, but you dream in different dreams. Yeah. So there are these questions that, what is the long-term strategy? And the dealer groups are thinking about that. You're saying, actually, that's great. Today you can offer me a nice replacement, new product, but actually, what does that look like in the next 5 to 10 years, which is their long-term plan.
But I think some of the brands that we expected to enter the market maybe last year, you asked me the question about the kind of study that we've done. I think you asked about the study that we'd done last year, and we identified as JATO the brands that we expected to be entering the market. Some of them are here, and some of them are the brands we've just been talking about. Geely and Chery and JACU and Modo and BYD. But others like NIO haven't really pushed yet. There was a big expectation, and they will come, but they need to get the things you've just talked about right. Yeah. Because dealers do have choice now of challenger brands, when they're looking. They do, and the proposition overall needs to be right in order for them to bring them on. Things like parts availability, things like recalls, things like warranty, that matters because that affects the dealer's workshop, it affects the technicians, it affects other jobs that they could bring in, and it affects their reputation. So they need, cars do go wrong, we all know that. But the OEMs need to be there to support the dealer network when they do. And those that can give those dealer group CEOs that confidence will be the ones that they select. And of course, we will have challenger brands challenging challenger brands. We talk about it, the new versus the established. But MG has had a great success. I think they bought 85,000 vehicles registered or something last year. So they're on the up and up, but they will be getting challenged by competitive brands. BYD has had great success the last couple of years, but they will get challenged. So it isn't just the established OEMs potentially having their lunch eaten by the new entrants. They'll eat one another's lunch, which is perfectly normal in a kind of open economy like ours. But that's where then the technology and the network and the dealer studies and the consumer perception to those brands really starts to matter. I mean, winning those industry awards for those brands will be big targets. Getting to the top of the NFDA surveys will be big targets because it means your distributor network are happy. It means the consumers are happy, and that creates a harmonious environment for retail.
I think back to Paul's earlier point, that we talk about the new entrants coming in, challenging established traditional brands. One of the reasons that we said right at the start of this, that 35 million production in China, those vehicles got to go somewhere. The latest BYD container ship carries 9,500 vehicles. So every trip that container ship, 9,500 vehicles are being delivered to a destination from just BYD in China. So, but back to the point there about competition. In China, the profit margins are very low for the Chinese manufacturers because a very low price point, 175 brands depending on when you look at it and who you count as a manufacturer over in China. That same goes into Europe or the UK, more profit, even more in the UK because they've not got the tariffs to concede with. But that will change because suddenly, to your point, the BYDs that were competing against the Ford, the Stellantis, now they're competing against the Geelys and others that are coming in, Changan, Xiaomi, Sepang, you name it. They're now becoming competitors with each other. MG, it came into the market fast, had a recognised brand to the UK and European consumer, had a good price point of entry, particularly in the EV market, but then others have come. So you've got Chinese new entrants now competing against Chinese new entrants. That has the risk of pushing down prices even further because they become more competitive, which then goes back to the conversation around the dealers. Today, margins are strong, but that's when they've got this price point that allows them to make good margins out of that product because it's so cheap produced back in China. How long that will last, we don't know. But that is the big question. But I think to Paul's last point there, the traditional or more established brands, they are coming back. They are having conversations. They are doing joint ventures with the Chinese manufacturers. They know that supply chain and technology is important, and they're coming back. They will come back and they will take on the new entrants.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been a couple of years that these challenger brands have been almost in the UK market and, past 3, 4, 5 years almost. And, our established OEMs are definitely looking to work with them. What would be interested in looking at the used market. So as we say, these brands have been in the market for a couple of years now, and we're now seeing that I think it's 67,000 young models of these new challenger brands are going to be entering the UK market this year, next year, very, very soon. When we see the used market kind of taking on those 67,000 vehicles, what do you think that proposition will look like?
I think it's it is the key question at the minute. We see the first, you say, 2 years nearly now from particularly BYD and then followed by JATO and Automotive, heading very quick into that fleet market and low cost of entering the consumer market. We will start to see those coming back. 2026 is the year that these vehicles start to come back to that 67,000 unit point. That's just UK. We're talking about Europe and South America as well in the growth that they've had in those markets. Now, at the minute, they're talking about having a strong used car strategy, but you've got to ask the question, is their growth? BYD are quoted him saying that they've got a TIV, so a target market of 9 million in the next 2 years from a 4 million today. Now, it raises the question, and I don't know what Paul's view on this, but so how do you double your volume from a 4 million to a 9 million in 2 years whilst having a strong residual value and a used car strategy is the one that needs to be proven. And that's the big debate that at the minute that we're looking out for.
Well, and I think, you look today, if we take the JATO7 as a new car today at sort of £32,000, give or take, a used 1-year-old JATO7 is about £6,000 cheaper. It's about £25,000. But a brand new vehicle on a PCP at 0%, it's cheaper to buy a brand new JATO7, brand new, than it is to buy a 1-year-old one with 5,000 miles. So what message does that send to dealers wanting to stock those vehicles, thinking, okay, they may appeal to a cash buyer to save whatever it is, 16% on the new vehicle price, but a lot of their business is written on finance. And right now, it's cheaper to finance a brand new vehicle than it is to finance this used one. A dealer's rightly going to be looking at that thinking, how long am I going to be sat with this vehicle for? And what is my road out of this particular vehicle? And until those questions get answered, until the dealers have that confidence, and it will take a long, long time, we are going to find that kind of maybe a lack of confidence from some of those brands who are those dealers that are still, some of them are reluctant to stock battery vehicles, let alone to stock new entrant battery vehicles. Some dealers are like, even a year ago, they were like, maybe 1 in 10 of my vehicles might be battery. And some will say, I don't even like to touch them. That has to change, obviously, as the vehicle park of battery vehicles improves. But the real battleground there will come true in this year and next, as we see that kind of, you say flooding of vehicles, but there will be a significant quantity of those vehicles coming into the used car market, and things are going to need to improve. I wouldn't be surprised to see, big incentives on approved used programs. Battery certification, I think, is going to be a big thing that starts to come into used vehicles.
We're starting to see that a lot, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because people will want that confidence that they've got, they might have the balance of a 7-year warranty, which is a fantastic warranty being offered by some of these brands. That confidence of a 7-year warranty, but it's going to need to be backed with finance incentives for used vehicles to break that disconnect that we've just talked about between a new and a nearly new vehicle. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some other incentives being built into those used car programs to try and build that momentum. And even Tesla had that challenge. Tesla had a challenge where they said, we just focus on new vehicles, but they now know they need to have a robust used car strategy, because if they want people to come out of a Tesla and into another Tesla, they need to have the right channels to offload those used vehicles. But I think these challenger brands can learn from some of what those other brands have done, what Polestar and Tesla have done. And they have an opportunity now to kind of build that strategy so that it doesn't become a big problem for them in a couple of years.
I think Paul knows this. The used cars will find a price point.
Yeah, of course.
They'll find their residual value. They'll find their price in the marketplace, because, they're a used car. Initially, you've got a dealer network, you've got a significant dealer network that will need used cars. They'll got a forecourts that will need product, they'll need stock on those forecourts that reflects their new car brand. So, initially, they will find the place, the volume will come in. We might think, well, it's a lot of volume, but initially, when you're sharing it across 100 plus dealer groups,
Yeah.
You know, it's not that big a volume in a market that we know is tight on used car products at the minute, and particularly when some of this new entrant product is that hybrid technology, not just EV, or it's that high tech, it will find a used car position point. We might be in a period of the next 12, 24 months where we will see this volatility as they find their price point, and then it will start to stabilise.
But I think with that will come things from government and councils around more low emission zones that will be created around the country that will kind of force some of those older vehicles off the road, so that people then come into those used vehicles that maybe, you know, still might be a petrol engine or a plug-in hybrid, so they have a bit of an EV range, and overall it gives them the right emissions level to comply with those standards. So I think we'll see that that shift where we naturally want older, you know, inefficient, uneconomical and polluting vehicles off the roads generally, and that will kind of come through the supply of those used vehicles into market, as well as I think some broader incentives that will kind of drive consumers to need to change some of those brands. But it is interesting. I think you're absolutely right. The challenge in the used car market.
There's a big question, and you know, we're not getting onto sort of the outlook and what the future looks like, but the big question is, you know, the UK, if we focus on the UK, because we can't come to with those numbers and not dissimilar to Europe and South America, but the UK is predominantly a 10 million marketplace. 2 million, 2.1 million new, 8 million used. Will we see a move from used into new because the new becomes such low cost of entry, such good value, or actually and that will grow the new car market at the cost of the used, or actually will the UK market grow and the renewal cycles start to shorten? So those people that are in the new car market that have moved from a traditional 12, 24-month-old marketplace, they've gone into new. Does both markets continue to grow is in time, and we become an 11 million market here in the UK from a 10 million market in the future? These are questions that we're not fully aware of yet.
And I think that's a really good question, because I think there is potential to increase the overall turn of stock in this country, but we do get ingrained into that typical cycle that maybe is longer than it might be in the future because of those different price points. Now that creates a great ecosystem if the cars are changing quicker. The population is getting bigger, but we're moving from 10 to 11 million cars, which is a big shift, isn't it? That extra million units is significant, but it's absolutely possible. There's also the flip side, of course, which is that, you know, you buy a £35,000 new Chinese vehicle that has a 7-year warranty, and then you have a £12,000-13,000 final payment after 3 years, and you elect to pay that and keep that car because I now don't have a car finance payment, you know, and that is the balance that we won't know fully how that plays out yet, but it will be interesting to see over the next couple of years.
Who knows? Maybe we'll become an exporter of used vehicles to the wider world.
Well,
Could be,
Could be a way to get, you know, some of the used stock out the market.
Fortunately, well, I mean, not everyone drives on the same side of the road as
True,
us.
yeah.
There's
That
only
might be
certain number of markets.
a slight challenge there, yeah.
Yeah, it's a possibility, isn't it? And then I guess kind of for a last question, I think we've covered quite a lot in the past 40 minutes or so. What do you think are your kind of predictions for the market moving forward when we talk about, I think it might be quite nice to loop back around into the global outlook that you guys were talking about at the very start, but also here in the UK within that challenger market?
I think, you know, we've seen this growth of the Chinese manufacturers and the new entrants. That's not slowing down. You know, again, a Michael Dunn quote is you know, a series of earthquakes followed by a tsunami is what we've got at the minute. Yeah. So there's a lot to come. There's a lot of focus, whether that's UK, whether it's Europe or looking at the global market. But there's a lot happening at that global level of the manufacturers, the joint ventures, the conversations and the partnerships that we're starting to see play out. So I think, you know, generally, whether that's UK growing in terms of market size, or does that then start to look at Europe and we start to see the European used car market shift as this cross-border remarketing starts to play out in Europe, that might change the landscape in Europe and give other opportunities there. But I think clearly, you know, when you start thinking about a 95 million global production, that is not slowing down. It's accelerating at the minute. So I think we've got a few years and conversations now here in the UK. What's going to happen with the ZEV mandate? Will it get reviewed? Will it not? How does this start to play into it? So there's lots to come out of this as we think about that more global picture.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But I think for the shopper, the consumer, there isn't a better time for them. This competition will deliver innovation. I mean, we can see that starting to come through. Even just last week, BYD announced its sub-brand Denza, 5 minutes to charge from 10 to 70%. I think it was 10 to 70%, and 9 minutes to full. 9 minutes to charge a car to full with a 300-mile plus range. So all those people that were talking range anxiety and their concerns, we talked before, and I know on the previous podcast, when you were looking at EVs, we're saying, oh, it's a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a short break. It literally is 5 minutes now, and you can be back on the road with a nearly full battery. So that innovation is going to come, and because challenger brands and established brands are competing in the same marketplace, technology will get better. Cars will get better. I think the big battleground moving forward, and this is happening a bit in the US, is more around the personalization, the in-car personalization. I think when we can combine AI with technology, with over-the-air updates, it will be really interesting to see how those things play out. I mean, I was at the LA Auto Show.
That big subject. We don't
have the time.
It's a whole different subject.
A whole different episode.
Yeah.
But I was over in the US and the Hyundai and Kia product launches at the LA Auto Show, and they're doing brand affiliations with the likes of Disney to bring some of those kind of personalization features into the vehicle. And look, whether those things will become what we British consumers or the European consumers want, we'll wait and see. But you'll definitely see a lot more personalization, a lot more AI and voice control and activation and personalization in those vehicles. So I think that will be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, always an exciting industry to be in, but definitely exciting over the next the next few years.
And just finally, to your point there in the UK, Holly, that thinking about the dealers' consideration, back to the study and the finding in the study, have a think about what is their demographic customer, where are they geographically, what is their part look like, what's their reliance on after sales revenue look like when considering one of the new brands, and if they're not thinking of one of the new brands, actually what's from an established brand, what's where they're under threat, where are their opportunities, where are they seeing loss in their marketplace. So there's a lot for the dealers to understand as this market starts to evolve and starts to sort of look like for the future.
And there's a lot of data out there for them, isn't there? I mean, you guys publish some great studies. I mean, we obviously look at the volumes and the market data. Auto Trader do a lot of this data. Dealers can be very, very well informed about these decisions that they need to make. And, that they will all have been prospected by a new entrant or a kind of challenger brand, and if they haven't, they certainly will be over the next few months as we see more of them come into the market. So good advice. I mean, dealers to do their research, look at the product, look at the mix in what they have today, but don't be afraid to take some risks, calculated risks, because those that have done very well over the last year or two are testament to how well some brands will perform. But it's an interesting market.
Always, as you say, Paul, an exciting industry to be in. And with that, thank you very much both for being on the podcast today. It's been a great conversation and very insightful, and hopefully as well to our listeners who want to find out more about challenger OEMs and how that is affecting consumer and retailer behaviour. So thank you both very much. And
thanks.
Paul,
thanks very much for joining us.
Maybe we'll get you on again, and Phil, third time's a charm, perhaps. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks
both.
for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for tuning in for another episode of the Talk Auto podcast. You'll find our email in the show notes if you want to reach out for a topic or would like to star as a guest yourselves. You can like, follow and subscribe on the Cox Automotive Europe YouTube channel, or follow us wherever else you get your podcasts.
And one final note from us this month, we are opening nominations soon for the Barbara Cox Woman of the Year Award. So if you know anybody worthy of this award, just head to our socials to find out more information. We'll see you next month.